Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I am your host, Lamont Gates, once again bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest flatlined for 2 minutes and was able to see the other side. Joining me, ladies and gentlemen, is Shana Pereira. Shana, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Thank you so much, Lamont. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you on, as your story actually sounds fascinating right from the introduction. But before we get into your near-death experience, let's get historically acquainted, if we could, with your religious upbringing. Were you raised in a religious household? Was there spirituality that you learned or were taught growing up?
Yeah, so it's a really funny story. I was born in my hometown is called Darwin, Australia, which is Australia's outback, to Portuguese and East Timorese parents, nationality. And with Portuguese people, our faith is very Catholic. And so I grew up in a very Catholic household where your communion, your confirmation, your baptism were just milestones that got done. And at 8 years old, I decided that I was not going to do my communion, was not interested in learning anything about Bible study, Sunday school. Up until that point, it wasn't even an option in my family for anyone to be a yes or a no. And I refused, actually, at 8 years old. So I grew up really I grew up with a real sense of dubiousness around, is this stuff real? Does it exist? I'm not sure. Even from a very young age, I had a lot of doubt from 8 years old.
So what was it that gave you this doubt? What was it at 8 years old that made you not listen to your parents, which is typically unusual for an 8-year-old, especially when we're dealing with God and religion?
Right. I think for me, I've always been a very pragmatic person. I've been a have to see it to believe it kind of person. Even as a little kid, I was really good at maths, as an example, as opposed to imagination and design. Like I was good at statistics and analytics, and it's carried through where now as an executive, I lean a lot more to the analytical side of business, where I'm very much about making things real. And that's kind of what I'm known for, even in my career. And so it started just very young, that I had to see it to believe it was my thought process.
Statistics, God bless you. I remember that course. So with that said, why don't we go into your near-death experience? Why don't you tell us what it was that actually triggered your near-death experience?
Yeah, well, it was December 2015, and I was back home in Australia for Christmas with my family. At that point, I'd lived in the US for 13 years, and I'd gone home to celebrate my achievements of, having been in the advertising industry, and I'd had a really great year. And I'd been tired, and I thought, gosh, I feel burnt out. I want to go home and just have a break and relax. So part of my trip down was to go to Bali for a couple of weeks of yoga and meditation and just Zen, and then to go to my hometown, which was a 2-hour flight from Bali. And while I was there on Christmas Eve 2015, my kidneys failed. And I ended up Christmas Eve in the hospital in which I was born in, thinking to myself, how have I gone all the way across the world? I've immigrated to the US. I've had this amazing career only to end up back here, and I'm going to die back in the hospital that I was born in. Out of the blue, there I was with organ failure. And so that's where it started. I came back to the US and after New Year's. And what was interesting was 2 years before that, I had actually led a course at one of the universities that was a digital marketing course. And during that course, I had helped 6 nonprofits one of which was the National Kidney Foundation. So of course, she was my first phone call when I got back to California to say, I've now got kidney failure. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And she said, absolutely, because we'd already known each other 2 years beforehand. Who would have known that I was going to be in need of the nonprofit service that I had supported through this class? And that began my journey of meeting the right doctors and the synchronicities of bringing things together to get me on my journey of needing a kidney transplant. So they put me on dialysis, and I was on dialysis for 4 years while I worked. And at the time I led an advertising agency, and I continued to work all the way up until 2020. And in between that process, 2018, end of 2018, I got a phone call from a lady who said, I saw your picture after hearing about your story on a podcast, and I want to be your kidney donor. And she said, the minute I saw your picture, I just got a message from God that I needed to talk to you and I needed to give you my kidney. Me being me, thinking, who is this lady and how is she getting a message from God to give me her kidney? And at the time, I was even more resentful of if there was a higher power, that it felt like I'd been forgotten about. So I was even more distant from God. And I had grown up obviously in the Catholic family, and I knew that there is something greater than ourselves. I have faith in something bigger than me, because, you know, from a pragmatic standpoint, even you think about, there's so much synchronicity, there's so many things, it can't just be random, right? Like the world has a way of working and a synchronicity to it that can't just be haphazard. Whether that was God or the universe or, Buddha or some other higher power, I didn't know. It was more so that there's something greater at work here. And whatever it was, I was extremely angry at it, because here I was on dialysis, and then this lady shows up that I don't know that says, I've seen your face and I want to be your kidney donor. So she begins to go through the testing experience and to be my kidney donor. Fast forward to September 2020, she got approved finally after delays with COVID, after delays in her testing and the process, because kidney transplants are an elective surgery. And so they were on hold while we were in the really serious part of the pandemic. And so September 2020, she got approved, and they said, congratulations, all you need is 2 tests. One was a CT scan and a stress test, and we can sign you off and we can schedule surgery. And I thought, fantastic, I'm done. This is awesome. I'm moving on. We're going to get the surgery together. She was amazing. She's become like a sister to me. And I thought, great. The ultrasound came back and the CT scans came back, and they said, one of your kidneys has a cyst that we think is 70% chance that it's cancerous. And I thought, I'm going to die. Because after all of these delays, after all of this process, now here's a synchronicity that says I shouldn't be here. 2 days later, the cardiologist called and said, forget your kidney, your heart is at 15%. And I thought, how have I ended up in this situation? I don't even understand what's going on, but I felt like for sure I was going to die. And that's where the realization hit me of, I really think this is it for me. So they did a couple of surgeries to figure out if they could get my heart function stronger, and it didn't work. And by November, the doctor had said, we need to remove your kidney and confirm that it's not cancerous, and get your heart strong enough to remove your kidney. And then if it's not cancerous, we can clear you and put you on the list for a heart and kidney transplant. So at this point, Lamont, you can imagine, I was like, oh, it's done. It's a wrap. I'm going to die. There's no way anyone survives this. And it was like one thing after another that had me feel like there's not a chance. I called my best friend, and she says, out of seemingly nowhere, she says, I know exactly how this is going to go. You're going to get your kidney taken out at Thanksgiving as a gift to the world of like, thank you, and here's an organ. And then you're going to get your gift of your heart and kidney transplant at Christmas. And because your kidneys failed on Christmas Eve, it's going to be a Christmas miracle. And we're going to make a Hallmark movie. She was like, this is going to be great. And at that point in time, I felt like I was in the movie Final Destination. You know, when like the car accident doesn't kill you, but the garbage disposal does? Like that whole scene was what had been playing in my head.
Your fate, in other words.
Yeah, like your destiny and your fate. It doesn't escape you feeling. I thought her movie sounds way better. Let me get into her movie because at least that has a happy ending. And it can give me something to hold on to. During that time, I thought to myself, if there is a God, let me get myself squared away. Because I'd spent my whole life with my family saying, you haven't done your communion, you haven't done your confirmation, like you're a goner. Right? You got all sorts of problems. Like you didn't do the things you're supposed to do. And so I thought to myself, you know, if I'm going to die and this is real, I have to get my stuff all the way together. Luckily, I have an aunt that's a Catholic nun. And I called her and I said, can you teach me, show me, like, what is this? And at this point, this was October 2020. Because I said to her, I'm really scared I'm going to die. And she says, yeah, you might. And I said, what kind of a Catholic nun are you? You're supposed to help people. What is this? And her answer was, you might die. Either way, you're taken care of. What are you going to do with the time that you have on earth? Whether that be 10 days, 10 hours, 10 months, 10 years, 10 decades, what are you going to do with the time that you have here is the only question to ask yourself. And I thought, you know, that's a really great question. And so I called the doctor and said, listen, we're making a movie. We need to hurry this whole thing up. We need a Christmas miracle. What do I have to do that? And that's when I started the journey of getting myself cleared. I had all of my appointments. I got everything lined up that normally takes 3 months, but I was able to do it in 3 or 4 days with the grit and determination that I was going to do this and I wasn't going to carry it into the next year. That's the mentality that I had going in. So December 22nd, they admitted me into hospital. And at this time, it was COVID and all the hospitals were jam-packed. I don't know if you remember the extreme stresses and pressures that were on our ERs at the time and our nurses and doctors at the time. The hospital was full. And you couldn't have visitors or anything. And so I was there December 22nd. The doctor called and they'd finally cleared me for the transplant list on Christmas Eve. And at this point I had surrendered. I thought, I've done everything I can do. That's it. And I remember thinking, God, if there is a God, now's your moment to show up. Do you know what I mean? Like now is the second this is your chance. Like, if you're there, this is the moment to make yourself known.
Absolutely.
And it's Christmas and the whole, like I said, if this is your moment. And I didn't have anything else. Like, I really was like, I've done everything I can do. And now if I die, I die. Like, I've done everything humanly possible. And that was Christmas Eve. The next day was Christmas, and all the nurses were like, we're making a Christmas miracle. That's what's going to happen. We were all very positive about it. And 10:30 p.m., they said, we still have a couple of hours. You don't want to lose hope, but you should go to sleep. And as I laid back, the phone rang, and it was Cedars saying, we have a heart and a kidney for you. And everybody was like, it is a miracle. We can't believe it. The doctors had said this is going to take 6 to 8 weeks at least, at the minimum. They couldn't believe it. It was a significant miracle that you just couldn't explain. The next day, the doctor, the anesthesiologist, and the surgeon came in to say hello, to check on me a couple of hours before surgery. And they were like, Shana, my goodness, you called it. I don't know how, I don't know where from, but it's a Christmas miracle. We're ready for surgery. We're getting you prepped. We're going into surgery. This is amazing. As they're standing there, I flatline. And that's when it became a true miracle. Because if my friend hadn't have said, this is going to be a Christmas miracle, I wouldn't have pulled all my appointments forward. I might have waited. If I hadn't have felt the pull to do it before the end of the year, I would have left it to January. All of these things came to light as to like the minute decisions along the way that had impacted. And as I flatlined, I remember falling asleep, and then all of a sudden I'm in this infinite blackness. Like, it's not dark, not like there needed to be a light switched on, but almost like if you were out of space. There was like this infinite blackness with no sort of physicality to it, or no like time and distance or form to it. And I remember thinking, like, where am I? And all of a sudden going, oh. And as I have the realization of what's happening, I'm in a hallway, and I'm looking down the hallway, leaning to the right, looking down to see, like, where does this hallway take us? And there's Jesus, who is a person just like me and you sitting here, where I could pick him out of a lineup. I can see that much detail on his face. And then there's a shadow figure standing next to him that is a dark shadow that looks like an ancient man, but I can't tell any features. And behind them is a light that doesn't have any kind of source to it. It just was there, like a light. It didn't look like sunshine. It didn't look like outdoors. It just looked like a light that just happened to just be there, is the best way I can describe it. And all of a sudden I feel this wave of compassion wash over me. Like if you had felt all of the compassion for every person on the planet times by 10,000. And I just remember standing there and just feeling it just wash over me. Like a real deep sense of compassion for being human, for everything we go through, for everything we suffer through, for the joyous moments, for all of the emotional roller coaster that it is to be human. It still makes me emotional because the feeling was so profound standing there that I just knew where I was. It's the only way I can describe it. I just knew where I was, and I knew that I was standing there. And I look up and God starts to speak to me. And he says, you are to start a church with your best friend, all denomination, not with the intention to convert, but to demonstrate that we are all united simply because we are religious. I never intended religion to divide, only to unite. And I said, okay. And I came back through the infinite darkness. And then suddenly I'm asleep again and I'm feeling someone trying to wake me up. Like, you know how someone's shaking your arm or patting you to like get you to wake up. And I thought, who is waking me up and what do they want? Like, I'm taking a nap. What is happening? And I opened my eyes and it was the nurse sitting on top of me doing CPR, doing chest compressions. And I moved her off of me and said, Margaret, relax. I just took a little nap. And I sat up and said, where were we? And the doctor's eyes were bulging out of their masks. Little did I know that when you flatline for that long, apparently coming back lucid like that and coming back to have the strength to sit up after having that long of chest compressions, after being there and having that conversation, having that kind of dynamic, most patients are groggy, delirious, they don't know where they are, you know, understandably. But I remembered everything the minute I sat up. It wasn't a recollection that came back to me later. It was there for me the minute I sat up in bed. They raced me to the OR, opened my chest up. My heart wasn't there yet. It was still in a helicopter coming. So it was still 2 to 3 hours away. So the heart came in a helicopter. They put it in, it started working immediately. My kidney came 13 or 14 hours later, started working immediately. They had to do one more surgery on my leg. And after what was about a 37-hour run of being under and going into the surgery, 3 days later, I was taking my first steps. January 20th, I was discharged. And by February 15, I was driving. And so the funniest part out of all of it was one of my friends said to me, minor detail, you hate going to church. How is it that you're the person that's supposed to start a church? And I said, I have no clue. I don't know what it means. I don't understand it. I've got no clue. All I can say is I'm the most unlikely person that this would be the charge for, right? Like it's so not, it wasn't on my list of things I've ever wanted to do in my
But you know, this is what makes your near-death experience not only fascinating, but absolutely believable. You know, I've always said that atheist near-death experiences are probably the most convincing because these are people who did not have a spiritual mindedness prior to going into a near-death experience, or overly religious, or even an interest in the concept of spirituality. But I want to go back and I want to ask you a few questions. You stated that in your transition, you came through this dark hallway type of placement, and you saw what you believe to be Jesus. My first question to you is, how did you know it was Jesus?
There was a familiarity to it that just said, this is where I'm at. I can't explain it. I just knew that's who I was standing in front of. There was something that just was like, there was a realization of like, I get where I am. Undeniable familiarity. And it was the feeling as opposed to what I could see. It was the feeling of like, I know where I am.
You also stated that there was a voice that you say was God. Was this voice audible or was it telepathic?
I would say I heard it audibly, like it felt like It felt like a conversation. I don't know if I could define telepathic per se, because I didn't even know where I was per se. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I couldn't see my own body. So it's like, I don't even know if telepathic would work in the realm in which I was, is kind of how I would answer that. I have no clue to be able to say it was specifically this or that, but I heard it audibly.
Many people talk about a light, which you say you saw also in the background here. And many people, many near-death experiencers, that is, also talk about how this light itself has an entire personality and can be communicative towards the individual who's having the near-death experience. So I'm just wondering, perhaps it was this light that delivered that piece of information to you, which was very fascinating. It said to you to start your own assembly, multiple denominations, wasn't really choosing a specific religion, and that religion was never meant to divide anyone. So after this experience, did you try to get this command off the ground at some point?
Well, you know what's interesting? Who I was before, I'm very process driven, right? If you imagine, I lead operations, large scale operations with hundreds of people. And so before, I would have been like, right, I got a mission, it's got a list, we got to get it done. There's all these steps. We got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and do it. In this instance, when God said, you are two, I didn't hear it as a mission. I heard it as a function. I am purpose built for that function. And it's kind of like a key to a lock. There's a specific lock that key opens that is very unique. But the key can also be used to open a soda can and to, drive a car. The key works for multiple purposes, but there's a specific lock that key works for, that it is intended solely for that particular lock. And so that's how I heard it. And so what has transpired is, through my healing journey, this is only 18 months ago, on top of that, what I'm noticing is different words stand out at different times. I had all kinds of questions, like, which best friend? I got 6. None of them interested or have on their list to start a church. And then what is the definition of church for us these days? Because for me, that's not a building. For many of us, it's not a building. After COVID, it's for sure not a building. Right? So it's like an unfolding for me, where it's less about an actual literalness at this point and more about, I am hyper aware of listening. And one of the things that's there for me is there's a unification was what was in his message. And when I look at what I'm good at, when I look at just what my natural skill set is bringing people together, and it's having them motivated around a particular goal or a value. It's about connection. And it's about the fact that, like, me personally, when I think about even my body, my nationality is, my family were immigrants to Australia. They have East Timorese and Portuguese plus Chinese melded into our nationality. I now was born in Australia with this heritage, immigrated to the US. I've got US organs. So when you ask me, even like, where am I and what makes me up? It's almost like a map of saying all denominations, right? And so that's what's unfolding for me, is taking the level of appreciation and understanding for each word and looking at what is the definition in today's day and age. What does that mean to us in 2022? And for right now, what is calling me is to share the story through mediums like your podcast, because of the fact that I never had on my career list that I wanted to be a podcast speaker or, any of these things. None of this is what was in my life plan. If it was up to me, I would have had my kidney transplant with my donor in August and called it a day, never talked about it again, and moved on. And so that's what's unfolding, is still making sense of it all, at the same time knowing I'm functionally built for it. So I have to listen to the cues and take steps forward without knowing the whole path.
Many near-death experiencers usually describe coming back with gifts, if you would. Some people may say that they are more sensitive to things like light, more sensitive or empathetic to people, more so than they've ever been in the past. Some people say they can literally hear the voices of other people speak. Did you come back with anything unusual after your near-death experience?
I did. And it's funny that you share that with me, because I've done zero research on near-death experiences. So I'll preface my answer by saying that even in you sharing that, I'm learning new information where I'm like, oh, maybe that's why I've actually felt more sensitive to light. So that was one thing that I just noticed just from you sharing what you've shared, that I actually have noticed that I am a lot more sensitive to light, which is really interesting. That's one of the things I've just had my own mini breakthrough here of like, I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the thing that I noticed most was while I was in hospital and in recovery, especially in the first 3 or 4 months, it was only me and my best friend, and I wasn't allowed to be around anybody else except her and medical staff, because with my immune system and COVID was all very sensitive. And so what I noticed was I've had probably 30, 40 instances of people that would have touched me and felt a deep sense of emotion come over them, where they have cried, they've wept, and they don't know why, just from touching my body. And then I would share the story after, and they would just be so shocked, me included, as you can imagine, so I'm just little old me, of this reaction. The other part was that a real sense of compassion for people. The compassion that I felt while I was on the other side came back with me, like a real sense of compassion and a sacred silence almost, where I can hear what's happening for another person without them having to say anything. It's like I can feel their struggle. I can feel what they deal with. I'm just super sensitive to their energy, to if they're going through something, it's right there for me. And there is a deep sense of compassion, as the only way I can describe it, that came along with me, that has given me just a different view on what it is to be human, and a new appreciation for even the tough times, of being glad that I'm here to even have a bad day.
So perhaps the message and the meaning that you received from this conversation and your near-death experience with God telling you to go back and start a church that doesn't deal with division, perhaps it came back to you in the form of these after effects, having the compassion, having people feel your compassion, despite who they are, despite their backgrounds, despite their religious upbringings. It's a way to unite everyone with that compassion, rather than dogmatically preaching it from a pulpit.
Exactly. I feel very strongly about that, in the sense that one of the reasons why I feel called to talk about my near-death experiences, we all have in common the fear of dying, right? And the fear of the unknown of what is there. And having more insight, if my experience can give just a little more insight to say, you are taken care of. And there is a specialness about being human. There's something about the human experience that we're here to experience. I think so often we are trying to be these spiritual beings that do no wrong and that are perfect according to a book, when really it's about, you wake up every morning and just try and be a good person. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you fail at it. Sometimes, I fail miserably regularly, even now, but I do so with a deep sense of compassion for other people and the realization that we are all human, that this all does come along with the experience of being a human being. And the part I think that has really been driven home for me, that I think really has changed, is I spent a lot of time before this trying to figure out, is there a God? Why is there a God? If there is, how come I was forgotten? How come I had to go through all this stuff? Like, why do people die tragically and unexpectedly if there is this, creator and this positive, this person that's supposed to be, or this figure that is supposed to be taking care of us? What I'm now present to is, I will never have an understanding because God is not human. Hence, that's what I'm learning, is all religions are correct, right? Because God isn't a human being. It's an entity, it's a presence, it's a creator. Some of our indigenous cultures, which I've studied since then, had practices where they're connected to sun gods, as an example, or nature is their connection to spirituality. Like, all of that is what I now find myself exploring, with an understanding that I'm never going to understand it because it's bigger than me. And that is what has brought me a lot of peace that didn't exist before this. And having had the experience of seeing it firsthand. I don't know if seeing it is even the right terminology, right? Experiencing it firsthand. I can only hope that my story helps others that are struggling find a little bit of comfort inside of that.
And I absolutely believe that will be the case, as you seem to be living out the I call it a command, I call it a mission, but you say it's none of that. It's the keys that you are handed, and you seem to be using those keys to open the right doors.
I hope so. Thank you for saying that. I hope so, because my donor was 29 years old.
Talk about compassion.
She died on Christmas Day. And the only reason I'm here is because she ticked a box at the DMV to say, when I pass, you can use my organs. And when you think about that, some action that is seemingly so simple that has me sitting here with you, that's where I think there's got to be more than just us, right? Like, there has to be something to this thing that allows us. I mean, that cannot just be a random coincidence. But she died on Christmas Day. And if that means that me sharing my story allows a little bit of her to continue to live on and a little bit of her legacy to continue, then it's such a gift to be here, to be able to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. I agree. Fascinating account. And I thank you for coming on and sharing your wonderful near-death experience. Shana, thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Shana Pereira.